Dagda Eve, August Fáilte. Hi, hello and welcome. It's John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and it is bright and early on this day. I have my coffee in hand. I have made my coffee and placed it upon the altar for the Dagda, and so I am here to check in with the community chats and answer another community questions. This is a quite an interesting one, which involves altars, which involves the Dagda, and so I'm gonna just take a sip of my coffee and then read that in for you. So this one came from Penny, and Penny was trying to looking for a bit of clarity. So I'll just read it out to you. I'm re-listening to Laura's class on Irish witchcraft and had a question about consecrating items for my altar. I've posted this in the Dagda's Hearth Facebook group as well as the Irish Pagan School Facebook group and received one reply which I placed at the end of my question. I'm hoping that either of you can help whenever you have the time. My altar has been an ancestral altar for several years. I now would like to consecrate the items on it through the Irish cosmology of land, sea, sky, plus moon and sun. For pictures of my ancestors, like my dad, the items that were theirs, would I just say something along the lines that I consecrate this X to strengthen my tie with my father? I was also reading earlier about how Donn was the first Milesian to die on Ireland, and the dead pass through him to get to the other world. Would it be appropriate to add something to symbolize him on my ancestral altar? And my next question was about Dagda and how we could consider him an ancestral god. I don't have a relationship with him yet, but would it be okay for me to honor him on the altar as an ancestral god? I've been learning from the IPS for a little over a year and I'm taking things slowly. I don't have any relationships with any gods yet, so nobody's toes would be stepped on if I honored either or both of them. Would it be okay to have them both on my altar to be honored? Would they get along? I don't know much about Donn. Sorry, this thought just popped into my head. The answer that Penny got by consulting the community was from Pat Booker, who is an Irish native spiritual practitioner up in Northern Ireland. Quick thought on in passing. Donn to me is more obviously an ancestor deity than the Dagda, but I don't remember that. But I don't remember that some people argue he was an aspect of the Dagda. Open to correction, as I'm much more a land person than a gods person. Any thoughts and insights or suggestions and or help would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Penny from Washington State. So thank you very much, Penny, for getting in contact with us. And yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's probably good that it came to me being the resident Dagda guy. But there is a number of different things to kind of touch on. First, of course, we're delighted that you're taking the classes and you're getting the value over going through them again. Like, once you enroll in a class in the Irish Pagan School, or connect with any of our resources at all, we like to try and give, like, ongoing access. If it's not like a closed period course or one of our annual courses, then enrolling in the class pretty much gets you lifetime access to it as long as you're a member of the school. So you can go back and revisit the courses, revisit the classes, go through the meditations as many times as you like, to help deepen and strengthen that connection. Also, like as usual, there is a link to a free resources guide down below in the description, which helps kind of navigate your pathway through the classes in the school, but also gives you kind of lists of this is kind of good resources and this is where you should be focusing your energy if you're going to be exploring this. So that's available down below if you're interested in grabbing that. But Penny did the right thing. Penny, like, connected with the community spaces that we have, because the groups, the social media groups that we operate aren't just casual hangout spaces. They're not in existence to kind of raise profile of me or Laura or anything like that at all. They're dedicated space to students of the school or students associated or focusing on their connection to the Morrigan, the Dagda, or Irish paganism in general. So there is a lot of peer-to-peer support to be had there, and Pat is a solid individual to be connecting with and to getting perspectives from as well as a native Irish person too. Um, so diving into the questions, then we're talking about altars, and in this case, ancestral altars. The first thing, as with all of this, is everyone's altar is always going to be unique. because it's a workspace. It is a spiritual workspace. In the same way you'd have your desk in your office for doing your office work, or you'd have like your kitchen counter for doing like your cooking work, or like you might have utility space for doing like your laundry work, domestic work. Like an altar is a spiritual workplace. You know, it is a place that you go to engage with that practice or that element or that enhancement of self in that aspect. So it needs to be functional for you. So as much as I could turn around and say, oh well, like, you know, I wouldn't put this here or I wouldn't put there, that's kind of irrelevant because it has to be about what works for you. Like I have a shelf on a bookshelf. I've shown pictures of it before. It has a cauldron that was gifted to Ireland that I'm in holding. I'm just the person holding on to that for now, but that's where I place my coffees for the Dagda. I have gifts kind of sent over to me from places around the world. I have a piece of an oak tree. Someone sent me a piece of an oak tree from, oh gosh, it's somewhere in California. I think it might be Chico. I'm not quite sure. A friend of mine, Meg, sent that over, um, like years ago. And so I was like, yeah, this is a beautiful piece of oak, and I put it on the altar. I've since heard that that tree was caught in the fires and has burnt down, so it doesn't exist anymore. So it's it's interesting that that is there, but like I also received a gift of honey, you know, and as soon as I was like, you know, here's honey all the way from like California, it's like this would be great to taste, and I was like, I don't get to have this. This is now his, so it exists on his altar. So it is about things that are functional for him and for that relationship. And again, I visit the altar to kind of sit when I'm in a formal practice. That's where I go to light candles, or that's where I go to make formal offerings. Or when I'm in casual practice or day-to-day practice, that's where I tip the hat and walk on by and give the whole wave and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Check-ins. Oddly enough, the shelf above where the Dagda stuff is the Morrigan stuff. And Maeve and Monan and I think Oma at the moment actually has made a place with Laura's altar space. So me tipping hats to him is usually like saying how you to her as well. And sometimes I intentionally do say how you to her. And I put on my broadest kind of note of, yeah, how's it going? But that is my relationship with the Morrigan, and I don't recommend anyone kind of mimic my relationship with the Morrigan. Um, so alter spaces, it is down to that intentionality, and it is a spiritual workplace when you come to it. And so when you're holding up any items that you're placing within there, it is about gathering that energy and that intentionality, because energy or magic use is energy is manipulating energy in accordance with one's will. To take the definition, I think it's the Alistair Crowley definition. So by setting your will to the item that you wish to make an offering, and then defining that with the words of saying, I'm intentionally consecrating this for the purpose of, you know, deepening my connection with my father, deepening my connection with Dagda, deepening my connection with myself, or with land, or with sky, or like whatever it absolutely is. It is about being clear in your definition before you step into that moment of consecration. So, like, think about it beforehand in the same way that a prayer or an offering or a blessing is always more powerful when it's done with clear, focused intention as opposed to just dogmatic recitation of the words. Um, and you know, there's nothing wrong with like recitation of the words. There are many prayers that, you know, are ingrained in my brain from my beginnings in spiritual pathways in Christianity. Um, but I often found that if I just repeated the words because I was told to repeat the words, they were just, I may as well be breathing or like burping or anything like that at all, because it was nothing. But even with those prayers, which is a form of blessing in my darkest of times, before I found my way to my pagan path, saying those words with intention saved me on a number of occasions. Um, so that's what we're talking about when we're stepping into that moment of consecrating something to ourselves, to our spaces, to our deities, or to the broader energies of land, sky, sea, sun, etc. Um, Set the words right, and then like say them with gathered intentionality, and be firm, be definitive about it, because that is the only way that you'll get the maximum kind of impact for what it is you're looking to do. Now on to Donn. Okay, so the stories about the Milesian arrival into Ireland is a very interesting one. It comes at the end of the book of the taking of Ireland, the Lerach Cabala Éireann, and the Milesians, the Sons of Mill, are the last tribe to kind of come into the island, and they're the one that the Gaels are descended from. So, like as Pat mentioned, like viewing Donn as an ancestor deity, if the Gaels, if the Milesians are the tribe from which the modern day Gaels are descended, then that does fit in regards to connecting with Donn as an ancestor individual. Whether or not he is a deity is where I personally have my questions on it, because what we have in the stories, actually, if we go back to the lores of it, the first son of Mill to come into it was a guy called Ith, and he was in Spain, and he was on top of a tower in Spain, and on a very clear day he was looking out across the sea, and he saw something. He saw something that he hadn't seen before, and he was like, "There's something out there." And so he got in a boat and he went out to find out what the thing was out there, and he found Ireland. And he arrived into Ireland, and he was blown away by it. It was this amazing, beautiful, abundant place, and it was so rich in life and wildlife, and like he was stunned by it. And then he met the people of Ireland, the descendants who were the Tuatha DeDanann, the descendants of the Tuatha DeDanann, the previous tribe who had arrived. And at that point, in fact, there was three kings in Ireland, MacKecht, MacGren, and MacGree. I'm not going to pronounce those right. They're actually the three grandsons of the Dagda. And so they're ruling in Ireland. And this individual is found by them, and he's brought to the Three Kings. And he's like, yeah, yeah, I'm totally, I'm of the Sons of Mill. We're like this huge conquering force that kind of came up out of the Middle East there. We've absolutely conquered like all our way through all of Spain and all the rest of it. Yeah, yeah, it's like totally. And this is a great place. This is a great island you have here. Look at all the abundant landscape. And so, you have the three kings, the three lads looking at this going, yeah, you're really complimenting our island here, but in the same like situation, you've told us that you're one of the sons of a tribe of conquering into like an entire tribe of conquest. So they have him killed, you know. But what's interesting is that they kill Ith, but honoring him and his remains, they put him back in his boat and they send him back. And so he arrives back in Spain dead. The rest of the Sons of Mill find him and they're like, "Oh, whoa, whoa, what the hell happened here?" And they then find out about the existence of this island. They find out about it, and that's when the conquest of Ireland begins by the Sons of Mill. So, unlike the Tuatha Danann, who came as descendants of immigrants so okay. I don't want to get into the full genealogy. I did a blog post on this recently. You can find it at the Irish Pagan School blog if you just Google that. It's about exploring the reality or the mythology of the Tuatha Danann. But the Tuatha Danann as a tribe came in as descendants of previous people who had fled oppression from Ireland, the Numidians. And so the Tuatha Danann are descended from a guy called Bale, and his son Buatach, and Buatach stayed behind, but it was the sons of Buatach who actually went out into the north and became the Tuatha Danann and then returned back in. So they were coming back to ancestral homeland, is what the Tuatha Danann were doing. The Milesians were not. The Milesians were coming in conquest. And so they arrive in conquest, and all the ships, all the lads, get all the warriors, bring everybody to this abundant, brilliant land. And they arrive in, they're initially welcomed. They begin their conquest in thanks to Amergin Whitney or Glungal, the poet, the filler. And it's him who's able to define relationship with Ireland and with the three sovereignty goddesses of Ireland, Bamba, Fodla, and Eru. And so he swears to each of the goddesses that their name will be on Ireland from that day forward. And it still is. Ireland in Irish is called Éire or Éireann, which comes from Eru, which is the god that Amergin swore, the goddess that it would carry her name. It's also called Banba and Fosla in older kind of stories too. So anyway, this conquering army comes on in, and the Tuatha initially try and fight them, but the Milesians are absolutely straight up wrecking everything, and eventually get to the seat of kingship with the three kings of the Tuatha, and they sue for peace. And this is where we get the first, this thing of like the first. So Amergin, this fella, gives a judgment, and it said that that was the first judgment given in Ireland. Now, there were many other decisions given in Ireland. There were many other judgments given in Ireland. The king had to give judge honest and righteous justice as part of their rule as king of Ireland. So it wasn't like there was no justice beforehand, but it's just this, Amergin gave the first judgment that was heard in Ireland. Um, but of course, the Tuatha De Danann are like, okay, well, listen, we'll surrender, sure, but you need to leave Ireland so we can prepare the circumstances, and then you can come back in, and we'll have a peaceful exchange of power. So the Milesians agree. They go back onto the boats. They go back off of Ireland, and at that point, the Tuatha De Danann are like, "The fuck, we're letting them back in." So they call up a storm. And so the Druids of the Tuatha De Danann call down the mists, hide Ireland, and they cast out a storm all the way across. And the Milesians on their boats are in a bad way. And then Amergin steps up, and having met the sovereignty goddesses of Ireland, having stood on it, he's able to then redefine reality through his bardic power. And he calls the name of the land in the name of the goddess to cancel out the storm. And so he does that by his power. They're able to, the storm just goes away. And great, we can now land back in Ireland and take ownership and take over. And this is where we find about Donn. His name is Donn. He is one of the other sons of Mill. He's one of the chieftains, and all on their ships. They're all there. The storm has just been calmed. Amergin is like, it's totally cool. I've called it off. We can go back in and take over because they said we can take over. But Donn on his ship is like, I'm going to fucking slaughter everybody. I'm going to place my spear on every man, woman, and child of that island. At which point, out of nowhere, a small localized storm appears directly above his ship and fucking wrecks it. So his ship is completely smashed, absolutely smashed on the rocks just off the coast of Ireland. And it said that he was the first to die in Ireland. Um, and the rock then becomes known as the House of Donn, or this, place of death, because he was the first, again, quote unquote, first to die in Ireland. Not that there wasn't previous deaths, not that there wasn't a lot of other circumstances before, but it's this Milesians redefining their narrative, the Sons of Mill redefining the narrative to take the conquer and the control. So there may have been previous judgments, but they weren't proper judgments because they weren't given by a Milesian. There may have been previous deaths, but they don't count because it wasn't the death of a son of Mill. It wasn't the death of a Milesian. And so this is where we get Donn. So that is the information that we have on Donn. The rest of the Sons of Mill managed to land safely back in Ireland. They do then take ownership of Ireland, at which point Monaghan MacLear leads the remaining Tuatha De Danann into the Hollow Hills, where they become the She, or well, again, Hollow Hills, another word is She. They become the people of the Hollow Hills, or the people of the She. But in that change in that agreement, initially with the wording of the agreement for the Tuatha De Danann and the Milesians, was that the Tuatha De Danann would have like the lower half, and the Milesians would have the upper half of the island. And that was agreed, and was like, okay, because initially when the Tuatha De Danann came back, they were looking for only half of the island in which to live, and the assumption was that that was the agreement. But the Milesians, when they come back in, Amergin was like, yeah, I said we'd take the top half of the island. That's everything above ground. And so by his wording, which was loopholey and trickery, and he is a filler, he defines the reality. And that is what drives the Tuatha De Danann underground into the Hollow Hills. Now, Ireland, though, doesn't balance well with this unjust act upon its island, because when Amergin first arrives, we have this beautiful piece of poetry. He's the first to step off. Again, this first. He's the first to step off the boat and set foot in Ireland, and he goes into a moment of like bardic impulse. He just falls into this poetry, naming himself first, and then introducing himself to the island, and then naming everything that he sees on the island. And it is this fishful sea and bountiful rivers and like fruitful woods and all of this amazing kind of glorious abundance that is the island. What happens after the Sons of Mill take over, though, is that Ireland becomes a wasteland, and it says that there is no milk or grain to be found in Ireland, because of that unjust change in ownership of the land. So, as frustrating and difficult as that is, it means that the Milesians then have to figure out how to survive in what has become a wasteland because of their lack of justice. And the last part of that story is the only way they can do that is by making friends with the Dagda. So the Milesians have to make friends with the Dagda, and it's only then that the abundance of Ireland is restored. So when we talk about Donn and Teach Donn, or the House of Donn, um, for me, I personally don't connect with Donn when we talk about death, and when we talk about like the him as a representative or an intermediary for death. The person I go to though is the Dagda. Because when we look at the lore and the stories about him specifically, we have the tale of how the Dagda got his magic club. And that was in order to bring back from the dead his son Kermit. I did a video on it before, I'm sure you'll find it on YouTube. But in that moment, Dagda takes up upon himself the power over life and death. And so, as much as he has power over land and like sea and sun and moon, like by his own words in that same story, he lists everything. He doesn't say sky, he's not a sky father. He's not a sky daddy. But he lists his authority over everything else, and then he takes on this extra power over life and death. So for me, if I'm going to be talking about life and death or dealing with life and death, I go to the Dagda. I deal with the Dagda. Now, because of those stories, because of his association with life and death, and then we have Donn being the first to die in Ireland, the names do kind of cross over, and this is what Pat mentioned. Um, it's not that Donn is an aspect of the Dagda. It's just that the word Donn is attached to the Dagda as one of his epithets, one of his additional names. So he is like on Allard, he is Fairben Bruch, Bromage, like the Rosk, but he is also known as Dagda Donn, and that is the understanding or the recognition of him as that associated individual who deals with life and death. So for me, again, I'm expressing my own information and giving the story of Donn as we know it. I personally wouldn't be putting Donn on altar space for myself, but I would definitely putting Dagda on altar space. Also, as for ancestors' circumstances, if the Tuatha DeDanann were the tribe who arrived in before the Milesians, yes, we're descended, like the Gael tribe are said to be descended from the Milesians, but there are many other stories, especially down through the Ulster cycle and all the rest of it, where individuals or families claim lineage from members of the Tuatha DeDanann. There's like, I think it's the Fitzgeralds, maybe it's the Fitzgeralds who claim like, Anya as one of their mothers, and that's why she is a banshee, a woman of the she, who's connected to that family. Um the Oganacht tribe, the Oganacht sept of Irish people down in the Munster region, they claimed like, lineage back to Dagda. So it is possible, and it's except now again, this is story, and we do have records and understanding that certain tribes would try and elevate or maintain their position within society by connecting back to these older stories or connecting back to these deities or claiming lineages. Um, but knowing and looking at the Tuatha Danann as immigrants, like they are descended from a tribe people who emigrated out of Ireland, and they came back into Ireland, the land of their ancestral homeland, as immigrants. Like, that is a story, that is the story of Ireland. So many tribes coming and going, so many people finding and like restoring and building connection within the land. And even at the Milesians, they came in conquest, okay, but they then, made friends with the Dagda and began a proper balanced existence within Ireland. And the story kind of carries on from there. So if we're looking at to pull it back in, I know I've rambled off into story, to pull it back onto the point there, alter space. If you feel a connection with Donn maybe do the reading yourself, maybe kind of do more research about it. There could be other avenues for your own personal experience that you would want to explore, which I would definitely encourage to do. But also then explore the information and the connection with the Dagda, whether you revere them as a deity or not. And that is the other side of it. Things just because you acknowledge or connect with energies or entities in your own process or for your own spiritual growth, it doesn't mean you're swearing oaths and, like, following, like, giving over your growth to a particular deity. Like, I I s- I honored many different forms of spirit, many different, like the spirit of land. Like, I'm a straight up tree hugger, have always been, like, literally. If we are anywhere near a forest, if you lose track of John for a moment, you probably find him not far away hugging a tree. So, I've always loved the energy of Ireland and the landscape of Ireland, or with feet in a stream if I can find one. Um, so there are different ways to connect and honor and revere with energy, but that doesn't mean you're swearing yourself over to work with a particular deity. I eventually did because I had a calling and a reason to do so, which is where I end up with being Dagda Bard and doing the job that I do. So, yeah, in regards to honor altar space, to take it right the way back, altar space needs to be treated as something that is a place where you do spiritual work for you. And if your altar space isn't working for you, then you need to change the altar space so that it does. Whatever way that actually is, whatever way that actually works, that's the way that it should be. And people find from time to time that they do need to revisit their altar, or relationships changes, or their relationship with themselves changes, and that's where they need to refresh that. And it should be an active place. It shouldn't be, I leave that in the corner and dust all gathers on it. It should be a place where, you're going past it regularly, you're engaging with it, even energetically. As I said, like, I shoot finger guns at the Morrigan and be like, "Hey, how's it going?" Again, don't recommend people do my format of relationship with the Morrigan. Um, but even that is an energetic engagement or interaction that I offer to that space whenever I go past it, and that's really what an altar space needs to be. So, um, hopefully that answers that question. Hopefully that gives some insight and some perspective on, Dagda and Donn, this ancestral element and life and death. Um, Penny, and I really do hope it has given you some perspective, or even some questions or some queries to kind of follow on and to research yourself. Speaking of researches, just to remind again, down the description you'll find a resources link to a free download. You can grab it. It gives good recommendations from us, from Laura at the Irish Pagan School, about, what are good resources, how to find good resources, but then also how to make your way through the teaching that we have at the school. So, from me, I will say Gaurav Mahagat, thank you very much for being with me. Thank you for sharing the time and listening to my rambles and stories. I am going to ponder off and keep considering a little bit more about this myself, because it has been a very stimulating question, as I said, and I'm going to finish off my coffee as well. So, from me here in the Irish Pagan School, I will say Gaurav Mahagat, thank you very, very much. I will say definitely go and look after yourself, and yeah, until next time, Slán, goodbye.